thing that I want you to know. I was that daughter at home, waiting for my mom to come home.
You're a coward. You're a nobody. You're an animal.
Because the rest of us who know the truth about you won't.
I wish for him to die. I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death.
All three women had been picked up from around the Strip by what the FBI dubbed an organized serial killer.
They were all within a few feet of each other.
The Pacific Northwest is a land of breathtaking beauty, a place where emerald forests stretch endlessly, where rivers carve their way through valleys under vast open skies. The air is crisp with the scent of pine, and sunlight filters through the towering evergreens, casting dappled shadows on the ground below. It is a region that embodies tranquility, a postcard-perfect landscape that has drawn generations of dreamers, adventurers, and those searching for a fresh start. But beneath this serene facade, a darkness took root, one that would haunt the Pacific Northwest for decades. In the shadow of Seattle's lush greenery, along the banks of the winding Green River, a horror unfolded. The water, once a symbol of life and renewal, became a silent witness to unspeakable acts. The river, known for its gentle currents and quiet beauty, would soon be stained, not just by nature, but by blood. Among the first to be claimed by this unseen terror was Wendy Lee Caulfield, a 16-year-old girl with dreams as vast as the Washington skies. Wendy had been a runaway, a teenager searching for something more, something better. Like so many young women in the early 1980s, she had slipped through the cracks of society, vulnerable and unseen. On a summer day in July 1982, her body was discovered floating in the Green River, a grim omen of what was to come. She had been strangled, her life stolen before she ever had the chance to truly begin. Wendy was just the first. Over the next 2 decades, the Green River would yield more bodies, young women, many of them runaways or sex workers, their lives cut short by a predator who moved among them like a ghost. The toll would climb, the victims' faces blurring into a numbing statistic. At least 49 lives lost, though some believe the true number may be far higher. Some of these women were never identified, their names erased, their stories left untold. The question hung heavy in the damp Northwest air. What kind of man could do this? How could he hunt so freely, leaving behind a trail of broken lives, yet remain hidden in plain sight? The search for answers would span years, crossing jurisdictions, consuming detectives, and leaving families trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. This is the story of the Green River Killer, a monster who turned a place of beauty into his hunting ground, and the hunt to stop him before he claimed yet another life. The Pacific Northwest in the early 1980s was a place of contradictions. A sprawling expanse of untouched wilderness just beyond the reach of Seattle's growing skyline. Towering Douglas firs stood like silent sentinels over winding back roads, their branches swaying in the coastal breeze. The Green River, its waters murky and slow-moving, meandered through the landscape, carving a path between thickets of alder and blackberry brambles. To outsiders, it was a postcard of natural beauty. To locals, it was simply home, a place where people lived, worked, and for the most part, trusted in the quiet rhythm of small-town life. But that trust would soon be shattered. On July 15, 1982, a group of teenagers skipping rocks along the Green River made a discovery that would change everything. Tangled in the reeds near the riverbank was the body of a young woman, her face pale against the dark water. She was fully clothed, a pair of jeans and a sweater clinging to her lifeless form. Around her neck, a ligature, a grim signature left behind by the hands that had stolen her last breath. Her name was Wendy Lee Caulfield. She was 16 years old. Wendy had been a girl with restless energy and a quick smile, the kind of teenager who dreamed of something bigger than the life she had been given. Born in Tacoma, Washington, she grew up in a fractured home, her parents' marriage dissolving under the weight of financial strain and personal demons. By the time she was 15, Wendy had run away, slipping into the underbelly of Seattle's streets, a world of bus stations, cheap motels, and survival sex work. She was one of countless invisible girls, slipping through the cracks of a system that had long since stopped looking for them. When her body was pulled from the river, the initial assumption was another tragic overdose, another runaway lost to the streets. but the ligature marks told a different story. This was no accident. Someone had looked Wendy in the eyes and decided she was disposable. And she would not be the last. While detectives scrambled to piece together Wendy's final hours, a man named Gary Ridgway clocked in for another day at the Kenworth Truck Company in Renton, Washington. To his co-workers, he was unremarkable. A quiet, middle-aged painter who kept to himself. A man who brought a thermos of coffee every morning and never missed a day of work. He was married, a father, a man who attended church on Sundays and mowed his lawn with methodical precision. But there were cracks in the facade. Ridgway had grown up in the same region that now held his secrets. A childhood marked by a domineering, abusive mother and a father who wielded control through humiliation. As a boy, he had been fascinated by fire, by the way it consumed everything in its path. By his teenage years, that fascination had twisted into something else. An obsession with domination, with power, with the women who walked the streets near Seattle's SeaTac Strip. He had been arrested before, once for soliciting a prostitute, but the charge was minor, the consequences negligible. No one connected him to Wendy Caulfield. No one even thought to look. On the other side of the investigation stood Detective Dave Reichert, a young, determined officer with the King County Sheriff's Office. Reichert had grown up in the Pacific Northwest, and the case struck a personal chord. These were his streets, his community. But from the beginning, the investigation was an uphill battle. The victims, many of them sex workers, runaways, or struggling addicts, were not the kind of people who made headlines. Their disappearances were often met with shrugs, their lives dismissed as high risk. The system had failed them long before they ever crossed paths with a killer. As more bodies surfaced along the Green River, Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Each victim had been strangled, each left in the water or nearby wooded areas like discarded trash. The press dubbed the unknown predator the Green River Killer, and fear began to spread through the region. Hundreds of miles away, in a Virginia FBI office, criminal profiler John E. Douglas studied the case files. The killer, he concluded, was likely a local, someone familiar with the back roads and riverbanks. He would be a man who blended in, someone who could approach women without raising suspicion. He would have a deep-seated hatred, a need to control, to possess. Meanwhile, from his cell on death row, another notorious killer, Ted Bundy, offered his own chilling insights. He knew how men like this thought, he claimed. He knew what they wanted. But even with the profiles, the leads ran cold. The Green River Killer was still out there. And he was just getting started. While law enforcement struggled to keep up, Ridgway continued his double life, attending family barbecues, going to work, all while hunting with calculated precision. He knew which women wouldn't be missed. He knew how to hide his crimes in plain sight. And as the body count climbed, the Pacific Northwest's idyllic facade began to fracture. The rivers and forests, once symbols of peace, now held unspoken terrors. The question was no longer if the killer would strike again, but when, and who would be next. The Green River Killer's hunting ground was deceptively ordinary, a stretch of Pacific Highway South lined with cheap motels, truck stops, and neon signs flickering in the rain. Here, under the cover of night, Gary Ridgway moved like a shadow among the women who worked the streets. He knew how to appear harmless, how to disarm suspicion with a practiced smile. His voice was quiet, unthreatening. He drove a pickup truck, the kind seen everywhere in the Northwest. Nothing about him stood out. His method was chilling in its simplicity. He would pull over, roll down the window, and negotiate a price. Sometimes he offered more money for outcall, taking them somewhere secluded. Other times he promised alcohol or drugs. Once they climbed into his truck, the trap was set. He preferred isolated areas, wooded clearings, abandoned roads, the quiet banks of the Green River. There in the darkness he would attack. His hands, usually steady from years of meticulous paintwork at the Kenworth factory, would close around their throats. He didn't use a gun or a knife. He wanted to feel their last breaths, to watch the life drain from their eyes. When it was over, he treated their bodies with a disturbing indifference. Some he left in the river, weighed down with rocks. Others he arranged in grotesque poses, as if staging a macabre tableau. A few he buried in shallow graves, their faces turned toward the earth. he never lingered long. By dawn he was back home, washing away the evidence, slipping into the role of husband, father, employee. The first cluster of bodies was discovered near the Green River in August 1982, just weeks after Wendy Caulfield's murder. 3 more young women, Marcia Chapman, Cynthia Hines, and Opal Mills, were found submerged in the water, their bodies eerily preserved by the cold currents. Detectives noted the similarities immediately. All had been strangled, all had been left near the same stretch of riverbank. Then the disappearances spread. A skeleton uncovered near Star Lake, a skull found in a ravine off Mountain View Cemetery, a decomposing body nestled among blackberry bushes near Kent Des Moines Road. Each new discovery widened the scope of the horror. The killer wasn't just using the Green River, he was scattering his victims across King County like gruesome landmarks. Forensic teams worked in grim silence, cataloging the evidence. Ligature marks on the victims' necks suggested the same killer. Tire tracks near dump sites pointed to a vehicle with a distinctive tread pattern. Fibers found on the bodies matched those from certain types of upholstery, the kind used in older model trucks. But the most damning clue was one they couldn't yet use: seminal fluid. In 1982, DNA technology was in its infancy. The samples sat in evidence lockers waiting for science to catch up. While detectives chased leads, Gary Ridgway continued his double life. He attended PTA meetings, he took his son fishing, he sat in church pews on Sundays, singing hymns with his wife. To his neighbors he was a quiet, hard-working man, the kind who fixed lawnmowers for elderly neighbors and never raised his voice. But there were cracks. Co-workers at Kenworth Truck Company noticed odd things. How he sometimes left work early without explanation, how he washed his hands obsessively, as if scrubbing away something unseen. Once, a colleague spotted what looked like bloodstains on his clothes. Ridgway shrugged it off. A cut from work, nothing more. No one pressed further. Meanwhile, the families of the missing pleaded for answers. Mothers held up faded photographs of their daughters at press conferences. Fathers searched riverbanks themselves, desperate for any sign. But the system had failed these women in life, and now, in death, they were treated as afterthoughts, case numbers instead of people. By 1984, the body count had reached 20. Public pressure forced the formation of the Green River Task Force, a multi-agency effort led by Detective Dave Reichert. They interviewed hundreds of suspects, tracked down thousands of tips. They even consulted Ted Bundy, who, from death row, suggested the killer was likely revisiting his dump sites, a compulsion to relive his crimes. But Ridgway's name kept slipping through the cracks. He had been questioned, briefly, in 1983 after a witness reported seeing a green pickup near a dump site. But he passed a polygraph, later revealed to be deeply flawed, and was dismissed as a suspect. For years the case grew cold. Then, in 1987, a breakthrough. Advances in DNA analysis finally allowed forensic experts to test the old semen samples. The results pointed to one man, Gary Ridgway. But by then, he had already killed at least 48 women. When Ridgway was arrested in 2001, he played the confused innocent. He claimed he didn't know why he was being questioned. He stammered. He hesitated. He feigned ignorance, but the evidence was undeniable. Under relentless interrogation, the facade crumbled. In a chilling monotone, he began confessing not just to one murder, but to dozens. He remembered details only the killer would know: how he positioned the bodies, what they were wearing, where he left them. "I killed so many women," he said, "I have a hard time keeping them straight." In 2003, to avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 48 murders. Though investigators believed the true number was higher, the Green River Killer had finally been unmasked. But for the families of his victims, justice would always feel incomplete, because no punishment could bring back the lives he had taken, and no explanation could ever make sense of the horror he had wrought. The King County Courthouse stood silent as Gary Ridgway shuffled into the courtroom, his hands cuffed, his expression blank. The man who had evaded justice for nearly 2 decades now sat beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, flanked by attorneys. The gallery was packed, reporters scribbling notes, detectives with hardened faces, and, most importantly, the families of the dead. Some clutched photographs of their daughters, sisters, mothers. Others stared straight ahead. their grief too deep for tears. This was not just a trial, it was reckoning. The state's argument was methodical, relentless. Prosecutors laid out Ridgway's own words against him, hours of taped confessions in which he recounted in disturbing detail how he had hunted, strangled, and discarded his victims. His voice on those recordings was eerily calm, as if describing a work shift rather than the taking of human lives. I picked her up near SeaTac. She asked for $30. I drove her to the river. Forensic experts followed, connecting Ridgway to crime scenes through tire treads, carpet fibers, and, most damningly, DNA. Semen samples collected from victims in the 1,980 once useless, now pointed irrevocably to him. A criminologist testified that Ridgway's dumping patterns revealed a man intimately familiar with the backroads and industrial outskirts of King County. A man who knew where bodies wouldn't be found. Then came the psychological evaluation. Experts described Ridgway as a man with a pathological need for control, his crimes fueled by deep-seated rage toward women, particularly those he deemed expendable. He didn't kill in frenzied bursts, they noted. He planned, he adapted, he remembered. Ridgway's attorneys did not dispute his guilt. Instead, they painted a picture of a man molded by cruelty, a childhood filled with humiliation at the hands of his mother, who allegedly forced him to wear dresses as punishment, and a father who berated him relentlessly. A psychiatrist testified that Ridgway suffered from personality disorders, his mind warped by years of suppressed violence. He is a product of his environment, the defense argued. A man who never stood a chance. But the families in the gallery weren't swayed. However broken Ridgway's past might have been, it didn't erase the futures he had stolen. When victim impact statements began, the courtroom air grew heavy. One by one, parents, siblings, and children stepped forward, their voices trembling with decades of grief. A mother held up a graduation photo of her daughter, a girl who had run away at 16 and never come home. "She wanted to be a nurse," she whispered. "You took that from her." A sister described how her family's holidays had become hollow, their dinner table forever missing a chair. A son, now grown, spoke of the mother he never knew. "All I have is a headstone and questions." Ridgway sat through it all, his face unreadable. Only once did he react, when a father, voice shaking with fury, leaned toward him and said, "Look at me. Look at what you've done." For a fraction of a second, Ridgway's gaze flickered. Then he looked away. On December 18, 2003, the judge delivered the inevitable. 48 consecutive life sentences, one for each murder Ridgway had confessed to. There would be no parole, no chance of release. As the sentence was read, Ridgway nodded slightly, as if accepting a mundane fact. No remorse, no apology. Across the room, families hugged one another, some weeping, others stone-faced. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. How could it? The man who had haunted the Pacific Northwest for 2 decades would spend the rest of his days in a cell, but the women he killed would never come home. In the years that followed, the scars left by the Green River Killer remained. Memorials sprang up along the riverbanks, small plaques, bouquets of flowers, handwritten notes tied to trees. Advocacy groups pushed for better protections for sex workers and runaways, demanding that their lives be valued as highly as anyone else's. The media dissected the case endlessly. Documentaries, true crime podcasts, news specials. Some focused on Ridgway's psychology, others on the systemic failures that allowed him to kill for so long. A recurring question lingered. How many could have been saved if the disappearances had been taken seriously sooner? Law enforcement faced harsh criticism. The early mishandling of evidence, the dismissal of Ridgway as a suspect in 1983, the years lost before DNA technology finally exposed him. The King County Sheriff's Office vowed reforms. But for many, the apologies rang hollow. The Green River case forced uncomfortable conversations about how society treats marginalized women, about the gaps in missing persons investigations, about the way trauma can fester, unnamed, until it erupts in violence. But it also showcased the power of persistence, of detectives who refused to give up, of families who turned grief into activism, of forensic science that finally gave victims a voice. Ridgway may have thought his victims would be forgotten. He was wrong. Their names are remembered. Their stories endure. And the river, once a grave, now stands as a testament to resilience. A reminder that even in the darkest waters, light can still break through. The story of the Green River Killer does not end with Gary Ridgway's sentencing. The echoes of his crimes ripple through time, forcing us to confront difficult truths about justice, compassion, and the value we place on human life. The decades-long hunt for Ridgway exposed glaring failures in law enforcement, in social services, in society itself. Early warnings were dismissed. Young women vanished, and their disappearances were met with indifference because of who they were. Runaways, sex workers, girls already deemed at risk. Their cases gathered dust while a killer walked free. But from this darkness came change. The Green River case became a catalyst for reform. Police departments across the country revised how they handled missing persons reports, especially for marginalized communities. DNA databases expanded, turning forensic science into a sharper weapon against predators. Advocates pushed for better protections for sex workers, demanding they be treated not as criminals, but as human beings deserving of safety. The lesson was clear. No one is disposable. To reduce these women to mere victims of a serial killer would be to erase them twice. First by Ridgway's hands, then by history's forgetfulness. They were more than case numbers. They were daughters, sisters, dreamers. Wendy Lee Caulfield, 16, loved horses and wrote poetry in spiral notebooks. She ran away hoping to find a kinder world. Opal Charmaine Mills, 16, was last seen laughing with friends at a convenience store. She wanted to be a hairstylist. Marcia Faye Chapman, 31, left behind 3 children. Her youngest still asks if mommy will ever come home. Cynthia Jean Hines, 17, collected seashells and swore she'd live by the ocean one day. Their photographs smile back at us, frozen in time, forever young. Families still speak their names, light candles on birthdays, and fight to ensure they are remembered, not for how they died, but for how they lived. Violence preys on silence. It thrives when we look away. If you or someone you know is in danger, speak up. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE. National Missing and Exploited Children, 1-800 8. Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741,741. Support organizations that protect vulnerable women. Demand accountability from law enforcement. Teach your children to see the humanity in everyone no matter their circumstances. The Green River still flows, its waters washing over the past, but never erasing it. The lives taken there remind us of our duty, to listen when others are silenced, to fight when justice is delayed, to remember when the world forgets. Evil wins when good people do nothing. Let these victim stories be a warning. Let their memories be a call to action. Share their names, honor their lives, and vow, in their memory, never again.